Welcome everyone. I'm here to talk about a tool for Clojure that I've written called Portal. So let's get started. There we go. So who am I? I don't know if you guys have heard the questions, but yeah, my name is Chris. I've been doing software engineering for about 7 years, mostly full stack in Java and JavaScript. But the last 2 years, I've been lucky enough to be able to do Clojure and ClojureScript. Specifically at Guaranteed Rate, and we are hiring. So if that sounds interesting to you, let me know after the talk. But yeah, the last two years of Clojure have been pretty awesome. So let's move on. So a rough outline of how this talk is structured is going to be, I want to talk about the motivation behind Portal and kind of why I built it, what problems it's trying to solve. Then I want to jump into a tutorial. And for this part, you can follow along if you want. I'll post a link for something you could download. But yeah, it's going to be essentially like the basic UI interactions. And then after that, I'm going to take some questions specifically about the UI interactions that you guys just saw. And if anything was confusing, the reason being is that after that, we're going to do a debugging section. And I really want to make sure that everything I did was clear. But yeah, after that, we're going to jump into some future looking things, and then I'll take some more questions at the end. So that's the rough outline. But yeah, the motivation behind Portal is kind of like this screenshot. So like I said, I came from Java and JavaScript, and kind of like the world I came from was on the left, where I'm sure a lot of you guys are familiar, but the Chrome dev tools are very powerful. You can very easily print data, not strings, and you can interact with them. It kind of understands the JavaScript objects, which is like a really rich environment to do development and debugging. And then you go to Clojure land, and the REPL is awesome, but it's still like you pass in a string that's data, and you get back a string that's data, but it's still a string, and you have to like copy paste, and it's just not as nice as what I would have what I was used to in something like JavaScript with Chrome DevTools. So, and this problem gets worse and worse as your apps get bigger and bigger, because your data models tend to also get bigger and bigger. So that's kind of like the rough motivation, is I wanted something like the Chrome DevTools, but for Clojure. And I think Clojure is like very well positioned for this type of tool too, because like everything in Clojure tends to be data oriented. So that's kind of my motivation behind Portal. So yeah, let me post this in the chat. If you guys want to follow along, go ahead. And yeah, if you can't, it's fine. Just let me know. Okay, so in that project that you can clone, there's this tutorial section. And so if you pop this open, I'm just going to do in my editor, which is Emacs, I'm going to do a CIDR jack in. So for like Culva, you would have Culva jack in, I think. I think you might be able to use the Clojure plain REPL if you want. It'd be much better though if you had like a editor connected REPL. Okay, so I did CIDR jack in, and now I wanna cover the Portal API. So the first function that you'll see, let me eval this. Okay, so what I did there, by the way, and I don't know if you guys can see this on the bottom right, it's like the keys I'm pressing. Oh, that's not working. Let me restart that. Let me quit it. I just want to make sure you guys can see the keyboard shortcuts. Let's see that again. Okay, so the bottom right, what you'll see is the keyboard shortcuts that I'm pressing. And what I did there is I pressed CPP, which is my shortcut for evaluating a form. And that's sending it to the Clojure REPL, evaluating it, and returning the response. So this is a nil. But yeah, let me get started with the Portal API. So to open up a Portal UI, you just call Portal API/open. So let me evaluate this. Okay, so what just happened is when I evaluated that, it opened up a Portal window in a external Chrome app window. So this is the Portal UI right here. And I'll cover the different parts of the UI as I go through this section. So yeah, and if you guys need me to slow down, let me know. But so I've opened the UI on the right, and I'm going to now use some recent functions that have been added to Clojure around tap. So there's this function add tap, which lets you set up a tap target right here. So when you call tap, it's going to call this function essentially. And this is more of the plumbing side. So I just want to make sure that you're aware of how this works. So let's do an add tap. And what that now lets me do is use this tap function, which if I get the docs for it, right, it says send any X to any taps. And what that's going to do is it's going to send the value and not necessarily the printed representation of the value. That's a thing to be aware of here, is that we're going to be dealing with data and not just strings. So let's get some data into Portal. Like I said, we can use the tap function. So I'm going to evaluate this form as well, right? So what just happened is the tap function returns true because it successfully put the message on the queue, and then it arrived in the Portal UI. And what you'll see over here is the tap list is what I call it, but it's just a list of all the values you've tapped. Let me tap another value. Okay, so what you're noticing here is the list grows. This number represents the items in the list, and the list is like inverse chronological. So the things that are the newest are at the top. And I can continue to tap values. So there's a vector, so that's our first composite type. And this is kind of how Portal represents composite types as blocks. And at the top left, there's kind of a short description of the type and the count, right? So this is a vector of 3 elements. So let's see what maps look like. It's kind of very similar to vectors and lists, right? Except for they have 2 columns instead of 1 column, right? And this number represents the number of entries. There's 2 key value pairs. So hopefully that all makes sense. Let's do one more. Okay, so the next thing, that's useful to know about the Portal UI is that you can select things and you can change viewers. Let me just go through the selection part first. So to select something in the UI, you single click it. Right, so if I click this, it's selected, and you can tell because of the bright red outline. If I click this, now that's selected. If I click this, right? And if I click something, the bottom left, you'll see the currently selected viewer for the selected item. So if I want to change what viewer I'm using to like visualize this value, currently for this map, there are 2 viewers. One is the inspector and one is the tree viewer. So it's kind of, right. So now if I click something else, you'll see it'll go back to inspector because the viewer for this value is not the tree viewer, it's the inspector. But again, I can change it to the tree viewer. So hopefully that makes sense. And to go back, you just select it. So the other thing you might want to be able to do is kind of suppress information that is irrelevant or expand information that is relevant. So to do that, you select an item and you need to run the toggle expand command. And okay, what is that? What are commands? So the bottom right, you'll see this command button. And if you click it, it'll open up and you'll be able to filter for the command to run against that value. So I said expand. So what you're seeing here is a command I can run on that value, toggle expand, and you'll also see the shortcut E for it. So let me run that command, right? So what just happened here is we selected a value. We ran a command on that value to toggle expand it. So it was already expanded, so it became less visible. If I click E, like I said, there's a shortcut E for it. Right, and I can just keep pressing E. I'm not sure why it's not showing up here, but right, and I can do this for any value I select. So I can do this. I can I can show and hide everything I want. So that's one of the first things that that's one of the first useful things to know, is that you can just hide and show things, which is really nice because if you have a big printout of data and you want to focus, you kind of can hide things. Let's see, the next interesting thing would be you can multi-select things. So if I click this value and then I click this value, and then I look at the command menu, I can run commands now that I can run commands that take 2 arguments. So a really good one is diff. I want to take these 2 values, right? These are just 2 Clojure maps, and I want to diff them. And I want to diff them specifically with this function that exists in the library ecosystem that diffs things. So what you'll see is that the difference in those maps is X was the key, and it's the same, but Y is different. It went from 1 to 0. So hopefully I'm not going too fast, but right. So what have we covered so far? We've covered, you can select items, you can select a viewer for the item, you can run a command on a value through this menu, and you can expand with E and hide with E, and also by running the command. Okay, so let's look at some other viewers that you can see in the Portal UI. So let me go back over, and I'll do. Yeah, this keycaster thing is not wanting to work. Sorry if you guys can't follow the keyboard shortcuts, but so this last piece of data that I tapped to Portal is a list of maps. And so a list of maps is a very special thing in that it can be represented as a table. So in Portal, when it sees a list of maps, it can render them as a table, right? Where the columns are the keys and the rows are the value of, or the rows are the elements in that like vector, right? That was a vector of 2 elements with these 2 maps. And I'm like, let me view that as a table. So this is a pretty useful view to have. And then one more thing you can do is that anything you select in the UI, you can get back in your REPL for you to play with programmatically. With the, you see up here how I took the value of Portal open and assigned it to a var called Portal. Anything I select in the UI, if I want to manipulate it programmatically outside of Portal and in my editor, I can just deref that atom. So I don't know if you see that, it's like 1, 2, 3. So I can come over here and I can do count, right? And again, I have in my hand in Portal a vector with 3 elements selected, and I'm going to count that vector in the REPL in my Clojure REPL. So CPP again, 3, right? Which is good because 3 matches the number of elements that I expect to see in that vector. Okay, so we've covered commands. There are other commands in the menu, in the command menu. So there's some useful ones that you'll know if you're familiar with Clojure. So one of them is like keys, right? Select keys, dissoc, right? There's a lot of the core common data manipulation stuff in the command menu available directly, just for like quick data manipulation. So if I call keys, and again, this is going to apply to the value I have selected, which is this map right here. So I should see a sequence of XY if I call keys on it, right? And that's what I see, a sequence of XY. And again, I can grab that over here and call count on it, and it should be 2. One of the things you just saw happen though is I went from seeing the like tap list to this other thing. Like what happened there? What happened is that we kind of added an element to the Portal history. And the way you navigate history is those buttons on the top left. So if I click it back, it'll take me back to the tap list. If I click forward, it'll go back to what it was. It's kind of like how when you're in a web browser and you're clicking links, you can navigate the history that you've clicked through via the navigation buttons, except for here, the thing generating the values in your history are commands. So it should be analogous to that. Let's see, what else? And again, like if you don't remember everything, I think that's fine. I think like just getting a flow for how things are set up is kind of the more important part, right? There's data on the screen. I can click it with one thing, like with a single click. If you double click it, which I do sometimes on accident, it navs into it. That's not really relevant right now. But because I showed you history, all you have to do is you just click back and you like go back. So that's a pretty common mistake I'll make sometimes if I'm going too quickly. But yeah, so you have a view, you have a way to select different viewers, you have a way to run commands. Those commands have shortcuts and they're listed on the right. Right, there's like enter, Control L for clear, which is a common one. Right, there's a bunch of commands. You don't have to know them all. You can look them up as you need them, but they're all there. And then there's history, which you navigate with these right here. Okay, so then I have a bunch of elements in my tap list and in my history. I want to get rid of them because they're like messing things up. There's two ways to get rid of things. I can click the clear button at the top right, and it'll get rid of them. Or in my editor, or sorry, in my REPL, I can just evaluate Portal API clear, and that will also clear the UI. And that's just nice because sometimes you'll get a bunch of stuff in there and you don't care about it anymore, and you want to start from zero again. Sorry. So I think this is a good time to do our first break for questions. Kind of threw a lot of stuff at people. Are there any questions? Okay, so if there are no further questions, I'm going to move on to the next section, which is the debugging. Let's see, what is it called? So if you guys are following along, this next section is going to be more around debugging an existing program. Sorry, let me get some water. Okay, so this debugging session, it reflects more of like a real world use case of how you would use Portal, right? It's not just me interacting with the things. It's like if I have a code base and I'm not super familiar with it and I need to debug it and I can reproduce the issue, which is very common, I feel like, in my day-to-day. I don't always know what this code is doing, but I can see that there's a bug and I need to be able to debug it, right? That's kind of the like goal of this is how would you use Portal in that context, not just a demo or a tutorial context. So let me make sure that the database is reset. Just ignore that. Okay, so there is this API called the shortener API, which should be very like, it should be a very easy, like a very familiar problem, right? You have a long URL and you can't link it. You want a shorter URL. So you provide it to a service, they give you a shorter URL, and then you give someone that shorter URL. And so when they use it, they get redirected to the longer version, right? So in this example, I'm going to define the URL to be this. It's not that long, but it's long enough. And using the shortener client, I'm going to shorten that URL, right? And so what that looks like is, and it's using localhost because that's the easiest way to demonstrate this, right? But now it created this URL that when I click it, will take me to the thing it points to, right? So this is a very reasonable API that you would expect. And right, if I call tap of get the client URL, you'll see like when I go here, I go here, or when I click into this URL, I go there. So the bug with this particular API is that if I call it twice, I would expect to get the same URL, but I don't, right? This is when I first shortened it, I got this URL, and then I got this URL. So it works, right? If I click this and it still takes me to here, but now I'm creating a bunch of duplicate entries essentially. right? Like this isn't how you would want to reuse existing URLs, right? You wouldn't want to continue appending. So that's the bug in the system. Let's see. And the other thing too is, right, they're not equal. So that's what that's showing. And if this comes up commonly where you want to tap a value, but you don't want to return true, because that's what tap returns, right? So like this is actually a really valuable tip right here. If you wrap the thing you're trying to tap in a do to, you'll tap it and then return the value. So this has been really handy if you're debugging code that's like in threads and whatnot. So to debug this, I call it enable cheat mode. So let me show you this cool thing you can do with Portal right now. I'm going to require in this namespace, I'm going to enable my cheat mode, and you'll see what it does in a second. Right, but I'll evaluate the same code. And I'm purposefully not going into the server code right now, because there we go. Okay, so what just happened here is I enabled like trace logging in the server, like the actual code that provides this service, which is called ul_shortener.server, right? And it went through, and before this presentation, I instrumented the code just like you would console log in a few places, because I didn't want you guys to see me doing all that and like putting it in random places. But here's a trace of what just happened when I ran this expression, right? When I called shorten URL and I provided a URL, these things got tapped out. And what you'll notice is this looks different, right? I haven't seen this before. So if I click on one of these, like, what is this? Okay, it's this viewer called log. And so what if I view it with the inspector instead? What you'll see here is that this is just a Portal map, sorry, a Clojure map in Portal. And it just recognizes this shape of data. And it's like, oh, I know what that is. That's a log entry. Let me render it like a log entry. Because usually we're used to looking at logs in certain ways. But if I click on this, like I told you guys before, if you do E, you can expand it to see what that value is. So if I go over here, the first thing that happened, and this is reverse chronological, which someone said that they didn't like. So let's fix that actually, right? I want to reverse the order. How would I do that? Now let me click this guy. Can I reverse? No. Okay, well, Clojure has a reverse. I can use that, right? So here's an example of me adding a function in Clojure to Portal to kind of manipulate the data in a way that isn't already being exposed to you, the user, right? Portal API register reverse. Let me make sure I ran this code. So let me run that. So now what should happen is I should come over here, click this. Ah, there it is. There's the reverse function that I just added, right? Using the Portal API. It's available in the Portal UI, and I can just run it, and it should reverse them, right?
That's crazy.
Yeah. So now I'm looking at it in the way I want to, right? And I think that's like at the heart of a lot of these problems is there's no one right answer. There's like the context matters. So in this context, we wanted it the other way. So the first thing that happened here is this happened. What is this? What is this? This looks like an HTTP request, right? There are some headers. There's some, like it's an HTTP post, which makes sense, right? You usually post things. This is kind of interesting, but what's more interesting actually is if I click on this entry and I look at the other commands that are available for this value, right? This Clojure map, let me look for this guy. So this is a really nice command. And again, you don't have to know all these. You'll kind of discover them over time as you need them. And of course you can add your own. But there's this thing called goto, and it goes to the definition of a thing in your Portal. So if I run this, and again, take note that it's GD, because I'm going to use the shortcut after I run this, but the command menu. So that's kind of interesting. What just happened is I selected this Clojure map and I ran a command that opened it in my editor, right? So this request map is this request like argument to this function, right? Right, and we can see that it's URL shortener server line 61, right? Like all of the data is here. To like, if I asked you, given this data, can you open up this? Sorry, if I gave you all this data, could you open up your editor with this line number and this column? And it's like, it's all there, right? Here's the file, here's the line, here's the column, here's the line. So that's all it's doing, right? Is it's taking that information and, hey, and this is really useful because a big problem I have is like, I have a bunch of data. Where did it come from? And I think a thing I see a lot is like people will tag their logs. They'll have like here 1, here 2, here 3, and it's kind of inefficient, right? And it's inexact because then you have to look at the source code again and cross-reference, whereas here you have a direct correspondence between what you're logging and what you're seeing. So that's like the first thing we get, right? If we're looking at the purpose here, by the way, is I don't expect you guys to understand all of this code, right? Just like put the value in the places where it's logging and kind of trace it roughly, because that's all that really matters, is that you get an understanding of the flow of the code and the flow of the data. You don't have to understand all of the intricacies of the code. So there's an HTTP handler that gets this request, and it has a body, but it looks like it's a byte stream, so I can't see it just yet. What about this next entry? Okay, so we called PostUrl. We got this URL, which we logged here, which looks to be, that's the correct URL, right? We were trying to shorten this URL. And then what happened next? I go to definition, right? And that's what I'm doing, by the way. I'm clicking GD, go to definition. And I got this value right here, which that looks like it's the database before I transacted on it. And right now the database is an Atom because I'm cheating. But okay, so it prints the database. It does this. And this is interesting in that it says it doesn't exist, right? Like when I log this false is the value of evaluating this expression, which is asking, does this URL exist in the database? And if you look, you're like, yeah, it exists right here. Like this is the thing that we're trying to get a shortened URL for, and it's already in the database. So it's like, what's going on there? One of the things you'll notice though is that this is green and this is orange. That's kind of interesting. So what's the type of this thing? Okay, so that's a string. What's the type of this thing? It's a URL. That might be the issue, right? That we're using the object representation of the URL instead of the string representation of the URL, which they're both valid. But in the database, right? Because this is what this is. Let me make sure I show you again, right? I click on this GD. I go to here. We're logging like this value is the database value. So let's look at this code again. Exists URL. Oh, there's the bug, right? When we're checking if a URL exists in the database, we're converting it to a string first. And I feel like this is a very common type of problem where this definitely would have gone past the code review, right? Where it's like, it's a small thing. Like those are the bugs that are the hardest to find. The smaller the bug, the harder it is to find because and this is a 3-character bug, right? But we were able to kind of like print out all the things that happened, right? Walk through them, walk through the code and kind of see what all the different values were at all the different points in time, right? So if I remove this, let me clear that again. Let me remove this and fix the code. Okay, let's replay our scenario. Let me start by clearing the database, right? CPP will clear it. I'll redefine the URL. Let's shorten it. I guess we can keep logging that. So the value is like here. And then, oh, so that was the thing I do sometimes, right? If you double click it, it focuses it. And then let me shorten it again. Let me tap that again. And this time what you'll see is that it's the same, right? So we're not creating a bunch of extra extra shortened URLs for no reason. So I think that pretty much wraps up the debugging section, right? So the things we covered are tapping log entries and how there's like a log viewer in Portal that kind of represents log entries, how you can use those log entries to go back into your code to kind of connect the logging with the code and kind of go back and forth. And then how to kind of quickly check the different values like types and whatnot. Okay, so I think that's it for this section. Let me wrap this up and then we can get into questions. Okay, so all the things I showed you, I hopefully were really cool. Those things work on the JVM and Node.js and the web version of JavaScript and in Badahdah. Not everything works everywhere. It depends on the runtime and what's capable in that runtime. But yeah, what I was doing is I was using Emacs and like a version of Chrome. There are some editor extensions if you're curious. Here's some community members who have different setups with Portal. So here on the left we have Portal running in an embedded VS Code context. Here we have one in an IntelliJ context, and here we have one in an IntelliJ context, but it's like a detached window. So for the future, I hope to add more. Like Atom would be cool to add an extension. For runtimes, I think there's other interesting runtimes coming up, like there's Clojure Dart. That'd be kind of really interesting to plug into that, or PostUrl, right? There's a bunch of interesting Clojure runtimes that I feel like Portal could be in. But yeah, looking forward again. I think there's a bunch of UX evolution that could happen. Like specifically right now, I don't know if you guys noticed, but when you tap something, like that's it. It's really hard to get updates to that value. So I think another evolution of the Portal UX is how to support things that change over time, like atoms and other things that have that type of life cycle that aren't just static data. And then someone recently opened up an issue related to code gen within your editor. So I was running a bunch of commands in the Portal UI. It'd be kind of cool if at the end of the day, I took some of those interactions, generated code, and just shoved them into the editor you're in, so you can kind of take it from there. I thought that was a cool idea. We'll see what happens. No promises. Okay, so this is kind of the end. Thanks for everyone for attending. Please try it out. If you want to contribute, there are many ways to contribute. You can join the conversation on Slack. Please report issues if you find them. And please, if you'd like, you can sponsor me on GitHub sponsors. So I think that pretty much wraps it up. So do we have any questions?